And you are streaming live. Oh, just a second. It's still thinking. Almost there. And you're streaming live.
Soon. So far, I'm just getting the logo.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Norm, I don't know if you want to change your viewings. If you want to change your viewing settings to like the gallery view.
I've got it there now.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So welcome everyone. Thank you for attending. It's been a little while and hopefully Betty will be able to join us soon. To start with, I'd like to acknowledge this meeting of the Advisory Committee of the City of Courtenay's official community plan on April 26th. And we were respectfully acknowledge that the land on which we are meeting and discussing today is the unceded traditional territories of the Comox First Nation, and we thank them for this opportunity. Okay, as we mentioned probably offline, we have two regrets today in terms of Dawn and Sheena. And since our last meeting, I would like to acknowledge that we've had 3 resignations. Aaron Novak, Lindsay McGinn, and Diane Hawkins. And all of those happened after August. And I would like to also acknowledge that when we first took on this assignment, we expected it to be, or was estimated to be 16 months. We're now approaching 30. And these resignations have all occurred well beyond that expected time of commitment. So wonderful contributions from all of them, and their inputs have been appreciated. Okay. Sorry, I have a bit of a frog in my throat today. We do have an official city agenda. And first, are there any errors, omissions to the minutes of August 18th, 2021? Seeing none, could I have a motion to accept the minutes? And Nancy, you may have, I may have.
Sheila has raised her hand, and then Tanis as the second.
Okay, thank you. I don't have the full gallery view here, so I'm skipping back and forth.
Okay.
All those in favor? Assumed. Thank you. Carried. Are there any late items to be introduced? Seeing none, we'll proceed. The first, we're going to start off with, as we mentioned in the notes a couple of times, with Nancy giving a brief update on where the project is now, what needs to be done, and probably what our role is in going forward. But Nancy, would you take over the meeting now and give us an update of where we are?
Yep, you bet. I'll start with that. I'm just about to share my screen. So in terms of questions, I suppose maybe just let me get to the end and then I'll answer at the end. That might be the best. So the agenda is key OCP changes. I wanted to share with you in broad strokes the changes that staff are working on as we speak in real time, based on all the feedback that we've had on the OCP since January. So that is the public stream of feedback, the stakeholders, the statutory bodies that we have to refer to, yourselves, you met with council, so a variety of inputs there. And so we're making changes. And I'm going to talk about the timeline of the project, and it's why I am sharing the proposed changes in a broad brush, because the truth of the matter is we are continuing to tweak language in a more fine-tuned way even after this meeting. So I'll, and just given the timelines we want to meet in getting to adoption, there will not be time to share the full OCP in its full polished form with yourselves before we take it to first and second reading. So this is why we're talking about this content today. And then there'll be a balance of the meeting for your chairs to lead a discussion and on that report to council. And I know you've already drafted some report. I'm acknowledging here at the bottom that this could be the last official advisory committee meeting. It likely is. So it's been a long journey, and I really appreciate working with all of you, those remaining from a staff perspective. I just have to say I've learned a lot. So thank you very much. Okay, now I'll get into my presentation. I'll talk about the steps next, because sometimes people kind of like to know that, and then I'll get into the content. So right now, staff are making changes to the OCP based on consultation. As I said, we're preparing a report to council and the full clean OCP. And then you concurrently will be preparing your own report to council. For May 30th, we intend to make that regularly scheduled council date. We would present the OCP for first and second readings of it as a bylaw. And then we would also at the same time take the zoning bylaw changes, which are to permit secondary suites in all areas of the city that have traditionally single residential zoning, and also to incorporate the development permit areas into that zoning bylaw at that time. And your report, the advisory committee report, would form part of that report. So council can see what your recommendations are alongside staff presenting the bylaw for the first two readings. We tentatively have scheduled the public hearing for June 20th. There are some procedural details that staff need to work with at a corporate level on the nature of public hearings moving forward, the virtual, versus not. We're just in a changing scenario with the pandemic and et cetera. So this is why I cannot confirm this particular date. But in any event, in that later June part is what we're hoping for. Then in July, depending on what we hear at the public hearing, then we would go back to council and receive direction from them on if they want to see any targeted changes in the official community plan. And then after that direction, staff would then bring it forward for those third and fourth readings. The legislation does allow for the OCP and zoning bylaw changes to be both read for the third and fourth time at the same meeting. So that's a small procedural thing, but we're really aiming for the summer timeline, as you can see. Now, talking about the types of changes that we're targeting in the OCP. And I am picking up the broader brush ones. There is nuanced language, dozens of spots for small language is being looked at. I'm not covering that here, but any of the broad changes that I'll talk about now. And staff will have to determine what scale of tracking to show our own council in the changes between the January version of the OCP and the one they will be presented with in late May. So it's quite possible you'll get to see, more transparently those really specific changes at that time. We're still trying to understand just how much of that detail we should share in our staff report. So the first one is about, a lot of people pointed out, we have new census data emerging literally tomorrow. Dwellings counts are coming out from Census Canada from the 2021 census. And so a lot of people said, hey, why aren't we using the latest data? And the truth of the matter is we started the modeling, the growth modeling, the land use capacity modeling back in 2020. And so to update all the population figures at this point would be quite an undertaking. And so what we're proposing is that instead of saying that this is a 10-year plan, which is what the growth had been projected for when the consultant started that in 2020, we're saying it's a plan for 4,500 people. and that equates to 2,900 housing units. And that's the benchmark then for when the plan should be renewed, as opposed to a timeline. So we see no major, issue with that. I mean, the plan can still stand. It's just that if we grow faster, we're going to have to renew this plan, revisit it faster. But as you know, there's a monitoring component to the OCP. And so that then falls to staff to be monitoring it carefully so that we know when the right time to review it is. We want to include those housing units that were modeled in this section on demographics. And I do appreciate that, and I know one of you at least pointed out earlier in this process, why are there different timelines, 2031, 2041, 2050? It can get a little confusing. So we're going to have to look at how to clean up that language so that there's clear storyline there. On the topic of kind of core directions, we're not going to change the cardinal directions or the branding or any of that, but we do recognize we need to address how affordability was considered through this plan. It absolutely was, in a holistic way. And so the various forms of affordability that can be achieved through housing by virtue of different forms of housing, more dense and townhomes and closer to home, creating opportunities for people to not have to own 2 cars or 1 car per household, and more of that getting at the root of health and supporting well-being and kind of the affordability elements afforded through that, particularly when we think of the other senior governments that also are funded by taxpayers and have to shoulder some of those costs. So we will include language on how affordability is considered holistically. I didn't even mention the energy part, which is, in the long run, as the fossil energy becomes more expensive, by decarbonizing, we will be saving money for households and corporately as well. So yes, that's a challenge to write that piece in here still. I shouldn't say challenge. I just mean it's a task is what I should say. Need to do that. Another change is it was not clear to a number of readers that when we were presenting the targeted growth areas for the future, that hazardous lands and environmentally sensitive lands were factored in as helping to inform where that growth can go. So we need to do more in the how we will grow section to assure people that those values will be protected, and that people will not be building residences in hazardous areas such as floodplain, and that is actually reflected in the growth plan. So the growth plan does not need to change. It's more that the explanation of how we got here needs to include those factors in a more highlighted way. We are still talking to the Agricultural Land Commission on the Block 71 area, which is, I'm circled it here in red. Those meetings are ongoing. So just understanding the conditional nature of the exclusion of from the agricultural land reserve up there. So there's some nuance there in the approvals that would have been generated by the Agricultural Land Commission back in 2004. So it's possible that the area, the expanse of the areas for future growth, as is shown by the hatching, could be less based on the discussions from the Agricultural Land Commission. So that's their regulation. We're learning more from them is basically what I need to say. Then in general, the future growth lands, whether they be up here, they're mainly, as you can see, they're in the north, the hatching, or down in the south, there's a number of spots that have the hatching. We've talked about creating policy in the plan, kind of a trigger to monitor, a growth trigger, threshold, maybe I should say, that once we've achieved 75% of growth of this modeled plan in the growth centers, that then we can begin the planning process for the future growth areas. So recognizing that they are, that we may need them. And I will say that even that could happen within even the life of this plan. So not necessarily having to open up the entire OCP and consider settlement expansion areas, which relates to our boundary extensions into the electoral areas, but that we could look at these future growth areas within the life of this OCP, provided that we've achieved certain development targets within the identified growth center. So staff are working on the language to convey that. On the topic of the Ryan and Anderton Neighborhood Center, we got referral comments from a number of bodies, the school district, the regional district, town of Comox, all interested in this area, wanted to talk more face to face. And so we are arranging a meeting with the landowner as well, to talk about the variety of potential interests, which, basically it boils down to, is the neighborhood center on the right side? Is it on the correct side of Ryan Road? Is its sizing appropriate? And is the wider planning area, as shown in the orange hatching, is that appropriate boundary designation? So that the people who are coming to that meeting, they have very specific regulatory concerns, or interests, I should say. So that meeting is, will inform what I want to say could change is the boundaries on both of these maps, whether it be the land use and then the planning area map. On the topic of the low carbon modeling, it was pointed out that there are parts with the table and the graph that don't link very well. The story is not clear. And so we're going to revisit the language to just make sure that we're telling a more succinct story of the top actions that can be taken in Courtney's boundaries to lower our carbon footprint. On the buildings and landscape policy chapter, there's 3 main policies that we're proposing to change. One of them is policy 5 about accelerating adoption of the BC Energy Step Code for all new non-city buildings. And you may recall it's worded so specifically because the city is going to try for the highest standard on city buildings, but for the non-city buildings, we do not dictate quite that standard. And so instead, what it is the proposal is that this policy would be to adopt the BC Energy Step Code tiers to always be one step ahead of the province. That's what we have now. What was originally proposed was to accelerate to the highest step in the step code by 2025. We're hearing a lot of concern that this is too fast for the industry to adapt, for the technology to catch up, for the training and skills to be here in the community. So this is now the new proposal. And we will explain this as well to council when these changes are being proposed and can receive direction further at that time as well. The number 6, this other policy, this one, it was worded, support the province in regulating carbon pollution for new buildings as soon as possible, no later than 2030 in relation to decarbonizing heat and energy sources. And we will amend the language to support the province and innovation in general in measuring also embodied energy of building materials and construction practices, including demolition. So we did hear quite a bit that there's a big greenhouse gas component to the actual, the materials and everything, not just the operations. So, and demolition now, and certainly our waste management board and the staff are very keen on trying to keep as much material out of the landfill as possible. So they certainly want to support anything on deconstruction, demolition types of practices. So this policy is simply saying we want to support that, but it's not actually assigning a very specific action for the city. And then on number 8 there, it was worded as require that all new buildings subject to rezonings achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions as a condition of rezoning. And then it goes on to describe how that would be measured. We've looked at what other communities are doing in this respect. And it appears that net zero is an incredible challenge at this particular time with kind of the market and technology scene out there. And we are proposing that it be defined as a low greenhouse gas emissions building, and that we use a different unit of measurement, which is greenhouse gas intensity limit of 3 kilograms per metered square per year. So that would be aligned with the Nanaimo policy, for instance, and a lot in the lower mainland and a few others that we looked at. So just a tweak on that, but the intention is still that because council approves rezonings at their discretion, and that this is an opportunity to achieve higher energy performance, sorry, I'll say greenhouse gas emission performance through those powers of discretion. I hope that's clear. Probably some of you who've been following the building policy more closely might tune into what's clear and what's not clear, but I'll keep going, and then if we want to circle back to the slide, we can do that. On the 30 meters in the riparian areas, because there's such detailed language in the development permit areas in particular of this work, their referral comments, public comments came back, but there was some confusion on what would be grandfathered potentially. There was a major question around that. How, if there's zoning that permits a secondary unit, does that then supersede the riparian setback requirement? So this is where talking back to the ministry on their riparian area regulations is something staff need to do, just to make sure that our language is very well aligned, and that those confusing, anything confusing in there is made less confusing. On the topic of community amenity contributions, we are proposing adding something to it, adding the separate parks, recreation, cultural, and seniors facility amenity monetary contributions to that stated reserve fund, reflecting either the existing OCP formulas, which are shown on the right, or the flat rate, which could be possibly $1,000 per unit. That's in line with a recent rezoning that was recently approved by council. So what I need to point out here is that to date, the community amenity contribution policy it proposed a monetary structure that the monetary structure, if that's the negotiation style that is achieved with the development applicant, that those monies that were proposed in the OCP that you would have been reading were to be split equally between the housing and the parks, cultural, seniors fund. What we're realizing is that need for that affordable housing, for that separate fund is so strong that we're proposing adding to the community amenity contribution a separate fund, and that those tables that you would have seen in the original OCP are for affordable housing. That money would go to affordable housing, and then this additional fund would be activated. So I think there's, particularly those who work in development will be very interested on that proposal. We are also adding a policy to, in the future, not with this OCP, but in the future, to explore applying community amenity contributions to development variance permits. This is not standard practice in BC, but we have received direction to do that. And so we recognize there's an opportunity for innovation and exploration, but we'll have to do it in a different timeline. And then we realized too that the language on, excuse me, the definition of affordable housing and which populations we're aiming to target, and what caps on rents or sale prices is not standardized, and that more direction on that could be useful. Now, we expect those populations could change over time, so we need a policy that's relatively flexible. But what we recognize is that when we turn the community amenity contribution policy into a separate bylaw, which we will do at some point in the future, that then more clarity to which target populations and affordability thresholds will be built in at that time. So that is, I guess we're recognizing a need in this work, but this work will not further that particular detail. Okay, then in general, there's a few other areas of maybe more general changes. So like I said, we're working with the waste management staff to ensure consistent waste management diversion language with the regional plans. That's more, kind of a technical thing. The spirit of the OCP would not change. Liaising with early years collaborative, and just today talking to school district about the more language on childcare, and they're changing mandate there with the Ministry of Education and what the city can do to support more childcare. So we need to look at the childcare language, more detailed language on how the OCP will be monitored, at what frequencies, and that regular housekeeping amendments will be part of it, so that we know we can continue to make adjustments as we're implementing. Then there's that suggested implementation actions table at the end of the OCP in the appendix. It's quite long, and a lot of people said, is this organized really the most concise way it could be? So we know we need to look at that again. And then the maps, there are some smaller tweaks on land use, road network, environmentally sensitive areas, and parks and greenways, but they are quite minor. I appreciate without you seeing them, that's not terribly helpful. And my challenge is that I've got a lot of sticky notes and handwritten things, so it's hard for me to share in this moment. Okay, I already talked about the next step. So now, I think I saw a head kind of shaking when I said, I wonder if this is clear. So I'm wondering if anybody has any questions, if you want me to go back to a slide and bring up a point, or if you want to just bring up more general questions related to what I'm talking about.
Nancy, it's Betty.
Hi, Betty.
I really like the idea that you've added an emphasis on seniors in this facilities or amenities. What I'm not clear about is that for seniors who are financially challenged, mobility challenged, any senior. How is that? Because we know that the seniors is the most rapidly growing demographic in the city.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thrilled that the word seniors is actually in there.
Yeah.
But I'm unclear as to whether this is supposed to be supporting people at risk or supporting people who have health issues.
Yeah, it is a more general fund. The money to date, so this fund actually exists today, and we take funds through community amenity contributions on rezonings, if that's the negotiation style already. And so that money gets channeled then into supporting whether it be capital upgrades, program upgrades in the existing parks and recreation system, of which there are some seniors programs. So there is no specific seniors facility or something like that identified, and the city does have now a policy on and a program to allow for more affordable access for those who qualify. So that does exist now across the board. But I guess what I want to say is the funds to date, and there's no departure in the OCP policy, is to go into that supporting the city's rec, culture, parks, facilities, of which seniors facilities and programs are part.
So here's where I'm coming from. Many of my friends are downsizing. They're moving either to smaller homes that they own, or they're hoping to get into Oceanfront Village, of which the lineup is already queued into the 10-year future. They have money. If there is something in there that can be an incentive in some way for seniors to facilitate this facility or these programs, I think it would be great. I mean, we're not allowed anymore to do park benches with people's names on it. And for many seniors, that's kind of grieving and a loss, because they feel ownership of their neighborhood, particularly as they become more mobility challenged. I just have to look out at the Riverway. And I guess what I'm saying is, I think there's a, now that you've dedicated and mentioned seniors as a highlight there, I think there's an opportunity there for Courtney to go with the unique aspect of seniors wanting to give back in ways other than a bench that's dedicated, but could be a long-term contribution. And it might have to do with environmental and parks. It might have to do with accessibility, but we know there's considerable private wealth. We know that people are retiring and staying here. I just think that this is something to build on in a way that I think people would be falling all over themselves to contribute. For partially for the recognition, partially for the appreciation, and partially for the contribution.
Thank you, Betty, for raising that opportunity. Hey, if there's more, partners out there, that's always a great story. I do believe the bench program is being revisited right now, possible renewal, but maybe there's I'm going to connect with that person who's working on that and understand if there's other options that could be maybe, flagged at that time, and look at where we could identify those really collaborative partnership, and what you're talking about is fundraising opportunities in the OCP. So thank you. I'm making a note of that. Yeah.
It isn't just cash per se. It's like planting trees, putting in chairs in places like Driftwood Mall or benches. There's lots of ways where if it were highlighted that you were making it more accessible for seniors in whatever way, there would be senior money for it. I'm quite sure, privately.
Thank you. Okay, great. Thanks, Betty. Sheila.
Excuse me. Of course, it's starting to cough. I'm thinking that I see these as two separate things. The policy there that would require a contribution for rezoning or development fees into that Parks and Recs function. But if I understand it, then that becomes a pool of money that it might be the city contributing to projects, but also it's based on applications from groups wanting to do things. And what really encouraged me was the section in the neighborhood policy framework that looked at identified using working with nonprofits and improving neighborhoods by having whether it's the community school approach or neighborhood houses, and those organizations working together to do these sorts of amenities. And one of the places, I think, Betty, for people wanting to put some money into the community, the Comox Valley Foundation is always welcoming funds. There's so many ways to contribute, and then they've been giving it back in these small neighborhood grant program that they're doing, that people are just, they're having community parties to get people together. They're putting in benches and things like that. And so I think that, the idea of this is a regulatory source of funding that developers will need to contribute, as opposed to the voluntary participation. And the purposes, I feel, are really like the intent of the city to partner and do as much as it can to improve amenities for seniors in a wide variety of ranges is there in the OCP. And I'm just really excited to see it. It's got some really good enabling language around that, a commitment language around it. So I love that part.
Okay. Before we get into discussions of particular areas that we're excited about, let's make sure that we sort of finish off. And I appreciate that was an important point. And thank you, Betty, and thank you, Sheila, for that discussion. But I just want to try and keep going through somewhat systematically. Right now we're on clarifying questions around Nancy's presentation. Are there any other clarifying questions?
Well, I still have a question with respect to growth.
Okay.
I'm not sure how the growth that Nancy talks about is related to the growth in demographics. I think that needs to be made quite explicit.
Yeah, Betty, I'd have to go back and look at kind of the population forecasting info. It was all done by consultants at the time, and those consultants are no longer with us. But I can access the info. What we what was done was that we looked at the population growth forecasting. We looked at household compositions that were projected. We looked at the types of land within the city that had development potential from a land economics point of view. That does mean redevelopment in some places. We're not talking just greenfield. And then assumptions were made about how many housing units you could put in to each of those areas. Now, certain assumptions would have been made about scale and size of family composition in that. So, you know, we often imagine that the bigger families, the younger families will want maybe not the youngest of families, but you know, with the children growing at home, that maybe they will want to be in the new single family residential areas. And there's various other kind of mix of the housing types throughout the city that were assigned to each node. You know, this many units of apartment, this many units of townhouse, this many of single family, although single family mainly is in the Crown Isle area. So so that's where those kind of infos come together. And probably for the OCP, we wouldn't get into too much more background discussion. I think actually our background study probably has it online, but yeah, Betty, does that help clarify? Or
what I see happening, and it's a cascading effect, is that in an attempt to stay out of long-term care homes, many people I know are building into their homes, not just the small homes, but not just a mother-in-law suite, but preparing to have, whether they'll get it or not is another thing, preparing to have a place for caregivers to live. Mm-hmm. And this is just huge. And it's huge since even the OCP has started. It's a point of conversation now that I just never heard of 3 or 4 years ago, and it's now mainstream. And that is happening here in Courtenay, and it's happening all throughout the valley, I'm sure. And so in terms of staying with that demographic for a minute, you know, Sheila mentioned the foundation. The foundation always strikes me as a place where it's wonderful to give money, but it's more money than I'm ready to give, or other people might be ready to give. It's kind of like organizational money, and it's seen as going to organizations. I guess what I'm saying is, I think that there's a way of handling this growth issue in a way that we need to capture with respect to what is actually happening with respect to people making decisions about the last 10 to 15 years of their life. And I still feel that it's a bit siloed between public services and the private sector. And so in this plan, I'd like to see something about how we cross between that. The city becomes the crossbar of the H, if you will, because there is something already going on there that I'm not sure that this plan is capturing sufficiently for the next 10 years. Mm-hmm. And if you're talking about being in front of the province, then I think that, again, I recap, there's a growth area in seniors, there's people with money, there are people wanting to avoid long-term care. They're looking at, I've lost count of the number of people I know who are selling out on their homes and going into patio homes and continuing, or apartments or whatever. And it's just a cascade. And then the people who are converting their homes so that they can stay in longer because they anticipate hiring, if not full-time staff, part-time staff. It's not the mother-in-law thing anymore. It's I'm going to stay in my home. Yeah. So I just feel like we haven't had enough of that conversation in the OCP to be ahead of the game. We're going to be rather reactive. And if you can make it explicit in the plan that you're going to connect these two growth areas or shifts, because this isn't just people moving into the city, it's people moving within the city. And you don't have to specify what those shifts are. It's just the recognition of the shift.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a couple things come to mind. So the caregiver suite or whatever it's called, a second suite, is policy to permit that everywhere in the city. Every property can have 2 units. So that will help with that, the aging in place piece. And then because the OCP is an infill kind of oriented plan, and it promotes a diversity of the more compact forms of housing, more of them than we have today. That was part of the assumptions, is that people are aging out, they're looking for smaller units. You're mentioning partnering then with those extra amenities and care and facilities. What comes to mind on that topic is in the social infrastructure chapter, and maybe we can do more in explaining what we mean by social infrastructure, but we actually do, there's recognition we need to work with the province and the feds and any of the other key stakeholders out there to understand the city's role in this topic, because to take it on is whoa, that's huge, right? But to understand what we can uniquely provide is what I would say that next step. So I think maybe what needs to be done is a stronger spotlight to help people understand that is in the plan. Yeah, okay, thanks, Betty. She's giving a thumbs up there.
Okay.
Okay.
Good. Any other questions, comments, folks? Okay, I'm going to just jump back a little bit and correct a miss that on my part, but I would like to welcome Chris Marshall to the meeting. Several of our AC committee members have not met you yet, Chris, although several of us did at some of the small group meetings we've had, but thrilled to have you part of the process and sitting in on today. Would you like to make a couple of introductory comments? You can say no.
Never give up a chance to chat with people, no, but yeah, thanks for the welcome. And yeah, I've been here since January 10th, and I've been involved in a lot of the sort of stakeholder meetings that have been held in relation to, talking through the different aspects of the official community plan. And I have to say, was very impressed with the plan when I first read it. It's a very progressive plan. It, I think, goes a long way towards the direction that I believe we should be going as a society. And so I'm very supportive of, and would like to see, but at the same time, we have to, somewhat, we have to compromise, because there are people in the community in which, their livelihoods are going to be impacted by this. And so both the people living in homes and building homes and businesses and things. So the changes that Nancy went over today are, an amalgam of the types of things that we've been hearing from the stakeholders in the community. And I think it's important that we, you don't change everything that everybody says, but, I think it's important to hear what people have to say and acknowledge what they have to say, and explain why you've made the change or not made the change. So it's an important process right now, because, people in the next draft or the final draft of this document, people are going to be looking for what they said and what their input was, and, go, hey, I thought I made it clear that, I didn't want this particular policy to be in the document, and it's still there. So I think we have to have a good explanation for why we're making the changes we're making, and be able to stick to it. And I think we got a council that is very supportive of the official community plan and the work that's been done so far as I can tell. So hopefully we'll have a pretty smooth sailing when it comes to adopting it.
Good. Thank you. Okay, just a timekeeper point here. We've gone through almost half of the meeting. So let me use as the starting point. We do have a draft based on the comments that were made back in August. The general tone of that August meeting that's reflected in our observations is that we were highly supportive of the OCP as it stood back in August. We've since seen the January report, and many of us have sat in on various stakeholder meetings. So I would like to build on what's in that report, unless anyone has any violent comments around it that would needs to change dramatically. But I'd like to just have a short, quick go round of what you think the positive highlights are, and then try and leave more time for what things you absolutely believe must be addressed or must be addressed better in our advisory committee report, because this is one of your two major chances for input. The other will be written comments to it in the next few days. So let's just do a quick walk around, very short, on what people think the key benefits of this OCP or OCP process have been, the positives.
Norm, if I can jump in for one moment, I know that Gary mentioned he can't stay long today, so I
Okay.
wonder if he might want to be in one of those earlier comments, only at his option.
Okay. Gary, do you want to lead, or do you want to hear a couple of comments first?
Thanks, Norm. I'm more than happy to lead. Absolutely. So I guess one of the positive highlights for me through, the whole thing, and then seeing kind of where things have landed is on the, for the business community, as far as, from my side of the table, is just seeing that, city staff is looking at the processes and how things are going to be, just new applications coming in, how those processes work, and see if some of those can be streamlined or, just helped along through the different, engagement processes, which is really good, because it goes right back to almost Betty's comment there when she's talking about, even the need for seniors, different types of housing, moving to patio homes, all of those things. Of course, as a developer, builder, I hear all those things, and absolutely, Betty, I mean, it works pretty good, because supply, demand, we've got a private sector, and then we've got process. So if I can get through those processes, I can help meet the supply. And, one thing that has been difficult through, I think, even through this whole OCP process, for not only city staff, but everybody here. I mean, we've started at literally a beginning of a pandemic, and you go through this heightened housing demand, amazing inflation like we haven't seen in 30 years. And now, at the end of it all, looking like we're going to go more into a normalized market with higher interest rates, which again makes everything look completely different again. So it's quite interesting, when we talk about, housing nodes and, some of these areas of growth, even what we've experienced the last 2 years, the next 5 years could even look quite a bit different than what we just experienced in some of those growth areas. So, obviously, a lot of those things are going to be dictated by what, what comes about with those. But probably the other thing that, Norm, you'd said, the second thing was something that we'd like to see.
Okay.
What was the second thing that we're supposed to comment on, the changes?
As we draw conclusions in the report and make recommendations, what are the critical areas that we think still need improvement, or have been underdeveloped, or the city needs to focus on going forward?
I would say, I think it would go right back to affordable housing. It's always such a broad brush, that term, to me. And just to try to understand, and make sure that the city has a clear plan of affordable housing mandate and what that looks like. Because there's many forms of affordable housing depending on what your income level is. So it looks different for everyone. And where do we go from here to help, the people that are, hanging out by the library, to a young mom that just needs a hand up, to a young family that's struggling. So it's very broad, and I guess just some clarity on how we move that forward does that mean, we all contribute as a community to a fund that can, provide some of those things, or I don't know, but anyway, I know it's a very big topic, and I know the mayor has a heart for affordable housing as well. So hopefully we can see that move in a positive direction.
Good. Thank you. Annalise, do you want to step in next?
Sure. Can we just ask the question once again?
So what I wanted to do first off was just do a quick roundtable on what you think are the major successes or positives from the OCP and the OCP process.
Like the process. Okay, cool. I would say like one of the, at least for me, one of the major benefits I see with the process is we've been able to engage so many different groups of people through the process. Like I definitely saw that when we had our last with the council, is that when we were having all those meetings, just how much we've been able to grow kind of our community and like all the different sections and bring that together in a document. I think one of the positives is from, I guess, youth is that there was mention that we're trying to build that stronger relationship with the school board as a city. And I think that that is really crucial. And I think that is such a positive way of moving forward in terms of initiating certain processes and just building a better relationship. So those are kind of two positives I see right now.
Good, thank you. Tom.
Thanks, Norm. I'm writing a huge long blog post that I'll publish someday when it's finished, and it will be a full treatise on the OCP process.
Okay, but
for now, I remember the very first meeting. We were all in the basement of Native Sons Hall. Nancy, Bob was down there. I was sitting beside Ian Buck, and we were being told that this was going to be the greenest OCP that Courtney ever had. And I think we did it. You want to talk about key components? There are thousands of key components in this. I think it's folly to try to pick one as the best. I think the fact that we pulled off the greenest OCP ever is enough said.
Good. Thank you. Sheila.
Thanks. I thought I was going to be a bit of a counterpoint to Tom, but and I have really appreciated the critical mind that you've brought, Tom, to all of it and trying to make it better. And I think that it has, because I'm kind of the enthusiast looking at it going, yeah, I'm happy to approve it without reservations, because of course I have a few things where I think perhaps doesn't go far enough or whatever, but I do understand the context and the rest. So I think that it hits so much, and the language is right. It's empowering. There's a lot of places where it kind of explains why this is what's to be done. And what I like about it, I think, if I think about the most. So what do I think is missing? Well, Nancy just sort of said something about, well, it'll include redevelopment, not just new green spaces. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, like no new green spaces. And then you said something about identifying zones for single family housing. It's like, no, because people got to move up, the seniors got to move out of the family, and we got enough of them. And then I'm going like, seriously, I am like, is there a policy in there about no new single floor buildings, commercial, like, and there should be one in there that just says adopt Tom Dishlavoy's plan for the Driftwood Mall, because that's the 2,900 units are right there. Come on, you guys. And it's walkable, right? But it is a start in language there. And what I do like is it's kind of normalizing some concepts like don't build in the floodplain. There's no discussion. This is just not, and expand the forest cover and protect our sensitive habitats and work in partnerships. And so I was looking at infrastructure, and I thought right away, it's why would we not have water metering throughout? And it has been a huge struggle since the day I arrived in the valley of not having water meters in Courtenay. And this turns it from a political issue to just an implementation item. There's low-hanging fruit in there that is like, you got to have water we need to promote conservation, and we need to do other things. So it's just a natural, implement it. And I feel like that is a big positive, that there are a lot of things in there. Use our excess street areas for other uses, minimize, parking, a lot of things that are just in there as normalized, factual basis of what we need to do. These things must happen, and they are going to be affordable, cost effective, extend our infrastructure use, all those positive things. They are going to improve quality of life, and it's built right in. And so for me, the underlying value isn't necessarily specifics. It's just that sense that it's green, and it is the right thing for a municipality moving forward. And how can anyone argue? That's kind of there's room for all the parties to come in and find their place there. It's not to pit anybody against somebody, it's not to pit the sectors against each other, but to say, this is where the future's going to be. It's going to be good, and we've all got a role. And so I'd say, well done.
Thank you. Betty.
I feel that the OCP has provided a bridge for the city of Courtenay to move from a stage where it was kind of growing like Topsy, having been a rural into a small urban mentality. And now we are accepting that we are a city. We're accepting that we're we see ourselves within an urban environment, and we're trying to plan for it. And for me, that is a huge success story, especially when we came through the COVID. And I'm very grateful in particular to Nancy for being the anchor throughout that whole time, because I've been astounded by the number of staff changes that I've observed. Everybody's been supportive in sequence. and wonderful people, but there's been no common thread except Nancy. So pick your color, Nancy. You get to choose the plaid. But I guess so. Coming with this now, I feel like we really have broken down some silos. We really are urban, and we really are planning for the future. And if we achieve not all of our green municipality plans, but lay a proper foundation, just like any garden or any building, it will grow well. It will be beautiful. And that's a legacy. And I really think this was a transition OCP. It had been too long since the last one. I congratulate the city for supporting Nancy and for supporting us this far. And it leads into my concern, and for the future, who's going to do the monitoring? Because city staff it's a kaleidoscope of change. So thank you for supporting both staff and council for this idea of a volunteer advisory group. And thank you for the members who have hung in there. It wasn't an easy paddle.
Good. Bob, do you have, as I know you've got a dual hats, but do you want to make any comments as a committee member?
Sure. No, has Tanis made a comment yet?
Oh, sorry, I missed Tanis. Thank you. Let's jump back to Tanis. My apologies, Tanis.
No worries. So Norm, I was kind of wishing that I had the draft of the earlier advisory committee letter in front of me because I'm not sure what I said that time. But a couple things just from the stewardship sector. I'm repeating myself from past meetings. Felt like the input that we had was received and that the visions and policies are very thoughtful. The environmental development permit areas flow from that, and that's where you get into the real world, compromises. But I have no bones to pick on that. Overall, I think just as a citizen, I'm really appreciative of a few things. One of them being the main message from this OCP that I hope people can understand, and the city can help them understand that land use policy is climate policy. Growth management is climate policy. And I guess the other piece that I'm appreciative of is all the work to try and tie in all of these different objectives into a whole and to recognize the linkages between them, like how addressing climate also addresses quality of life, for instance. So I don't have a particular thing that I think there's a shortcoming on, Norm, but for going forward, there's always a concern about implementation, monitoring, measuring, meeting targets, and setting up a framework for that. And so I was very aware that there was effort being put towards that in this document already, and more to come from, I think, what I'm hearing. So that part for all these kind of planning documents is absolutely critical. And I've been involved all this time just hoping and wondering, how far we'll get, what the uptake will be, what the buy-in will be, and, what implementation will be. So that's the piece that I'm watching with, interest and concern.
Good. Thank you. Bob.
Thanks. Well, I think, for me, it was always, I think, a vision of council. I'll kind of speak as council, to have an OCP that was, had an environmental lens, had a First Nations reconciliation lens, and then, of course, having a housing affordability lens. And the challenge is that some of those things support each other. Sometimes they are at odds with each other. But really to make sure that we're clear on what we want to have the focus to be, and I think that's been done really well. And if I look back at some of the stakeholder meetings that I've been able to participate in, especially with the developers one, which they've got a cost issue that often gets triggered. And Tom was there. I think I sat next to Tom a little bit. I don't think he hurt me or anything. But I think one was it could have been a very negative meeting, but it was a very positive meeting with some very productive and specific suggestions to not just make the OCP better, but development in general. And so just everybody's focus on it's been great. Lastly, I just want to mention to Annalise, I worked on my first OCP as a teenager back in around 1990 something, 2 or so. And so just be careful. One, this is far more progressive than the one back in the early 90s, but be careful where you end up. You might end up, doing silly things as you get older. So, but just a huge thank you to everybody, and obviously to staff who, through COVID, kept this project going, albeit it obviously added to the timeline.
It's absolutely critical in my mind that we do these things so that we have that roadmap moving forward. So thanks.
Thanks, Bob. My overall comment in terms of the positive is the OCP is intended to be the capstone document for the city. And as such, I think it did very well in establishing both the city's vision and cardinal directions, and then incorporating in a way that recognizes the linkages and the trade-offs, the major policies like the climate change policy, the affordable housing policy, the transportation master plan, the parks master plan, all balanced. And I think the OCP does a very good job of being that overarching document to give some guidance going forward to the city. So my compliments there. The other half of what we want to do is looking forward to making recommendations to council from the OCP, both in written form and then hopefully in a short presentation on May the 30th. We'll be invited to do that, although I haven't heard for sure. I've heard some of the recommendations going forward. One would be Tanis's, the implementation is absolutely critical and needs to be focused on. Without spending time to flip back in my notes, Gary said going forward as well, we need to be focusing on affordable housing and continually updating the clear strategy and mandate so that that's as effective as possible. What are the other messages that you want to ensure council hears? Anyone want to take a lead? I'm because I have to screen. Betty, thank you.
Well, I really like the idea. I'm so enamored of the idea that we densify within the city boundaries, that we're not going to get involved in urban sprawl. I really hope that that becomes a beacon and a highlight and a lodestone. Having said that, of course, that immediately means that affordability becomes an increased problem because we're going to have more people in a confined space. And one of the things that happens is that, you know, I'm aware of, I just got a phone call. I'm aware of Dr. Reg, the doctors saying that they, you know, they're worried about attracting doctors and that they think that we should expand, not densify. Dr. Regler's presentation, and I'm a great fan of Dr. Regler's. I'm a patient of his, but it reminded me that we have some educational work to do now that the plan is coming to completion, and that there are sectors such as the healthcare sectors that we have not really talked to. So I guess as we move forward to completion, and I congratulate everyone who's hung in there and been supportive, and Norm, thank you for being our leader. And I just think that this monitoring issue, I keep turning to the monitoring issue, the educational issue. And so I really hope that that's built in, that it just doesn't get dropped. And these values that Nancy has so consistently underlined. She talks about the 4 cardinal values. We talk about wanting to be a green city, a livable city, that they're revisited from time to time and not gotten lost, because council will change. We know that city staff changes. So there's no monitor in here. And that's why I think you keep hearing from us, who's going to be the monitor? Who's going to be the monitor? But thank you for everybody who's hung in there. I just can't believe the number of AC members who are here today. That's just fabulous.
You know, just to briefly recap, the conclusions drawn back in August was this OCP is a strong addition to the city's set of plans. the community engagement was reasonable under the circumstances, that we appreciate the full cost accounting that the city is doing, but also encourage the city to look into the cost of not taking some actions, that implementation is critical, and that community education is critical. And that we raised the potential for some sort of an implementation advisory committee. So the recommendations that we proposed at that time as draft were the advisory committee strongly supports the adoption of the proposed official community plan to make significant progress towards realizing the vision. The OCP Advisory Committee recommends an aggressive implementation plan. And there's a recommendation around continuing an extensive community education effort. And so those are the primary things. Now, I'm just going to jump right back out for a minute. Sheena had given us her comments, and she's generally supportive, strongly supportive of the plan. What wants us to be very careful with our language of how we deal with or recognize and I apologize that I'm going to use the old language. The disadvantaged members of our community, the equity challenged people in our community, and make sure that our report properly reflects that. And she had a few suggestions for me. Are there some comments or recommendations people want to emphasize or make or add to that list? One of the things that I find frustrating, and I would encourage Chris and Nancy and all those that might do it again, is that I think the OCP has too broad of a mandate. It is not only supposed to be the overarching document, but it's supposed to go into endless detail across a dozen different areas, and then specific policies on many of those things, including development zones and development approvals, and the level of deep. So it's at one time being the capstone document for the city, and at the same time trying to drill down into incredible depth and specificity so that everybody can find their answer. And I think this attempt to make it a document that satisfies everybody detracts from it. I think that you would get more value out of a document that focuses on the bigger picture, what you want to hold the community and future councils and administrations, where you want to hold their feet to the fire to make progress on our big things. And then another suite of saying, here's our implementation strategy. But when you have hundreds of objectives and hundreds of policies, it is really confusing for the reader to understand what the priorities are, the sequencing, how they fit together. And so the one recommendation one thing I would encourage, I'm not sure it's a recommendation, is to think of what the purpose of the OCP is and whether or not it should be 1 or 2 or 3 documents. Any reaction? Betty, yeah.
I think you've expressed very eloquently something that I was feeling much more hazily. I'm just not sure a 10-year plan works anymore. We've abandoned 5-year plans. We talk about 3-year plans. It just feels like sometimes 10 years is just really struggling to point the cow going home when the cow wants to go to feed. I totally agree with the confusion between the breadth and the depth. And I would avoid breaking up into sectors because we already have this tendency for siloing. But I would love to have had more conversation about this is a 3-year, this is a 5-year, and this is a 10-year goal, or something that to help clarify. 10 years just seems forever with the rapidity that I've observed in the time that I've served.
Good. Anyone else? Sheila.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have that same concern because I think this is the nature of an official community plan. That and in fact, it's one that in many ways has more context and positive language. Like there's pieces of this puzzle. There's the growth plan, which I, regional things, our regional sustainability, and the growth plan, which that would be something maybe the council could think about going back and renaming it the regional growth management plan, because that in order to get it passed by previous councils, it had to have management taken out and just be growth. But those were big kind of aspirational visionary pieces, and the sustainability plan that was done on that same level. But the official community plan has to reflect directions for zoning, bylaws, all that kind of stuff. And then it has some, clear statements of policy around that. And there's going to be way more detail, Norm, that gets developed on specific pieces of that. And it won't necessarily happen all at once. The council will now be working with its senior management team. Every year they set those shorter plans, Betty, 3-5-year priorities, what they want to accomplish in the span of their term, which they'll undoubtedly be doing really significant planning after the elections. And then budgetary things, that feeds into the budget. So they identify priorities within it, and they have a chance to respond to any kind of monitoring that is done and respond to changes in demographics, changes in the economic situation. So I feel it's that right balance. It is what an official community plan is the big and then some specifics. And it becomes a working document then for staff will be drawing up or amending existing bylaws and drawing up new ones and new schedules. They'll be doing some very technical work, and they'll be supporting whatever councils do in identifying priorities. And I just feel like the basis for doing really good work is here. I don't see, some areas there's not a lot of detail because that'll evolve, but it really hit a lot of bases. And, that old argument about city councils, municipalities are just supposed to deal with sewer and roads, that's gone too, because this is about emphasizing less on roads and more on walkability, livability, transportation. It includes the housing, which in the last 10 years, we've gone from people saying, no, housing's not a municipal issue, to a document that firmly endorses it, and it represents both the wishes of the public and the leadership of a council that understands the role of the municipality. And there's a lot of negotiations going on right now because municipalities are the ones who can get the work done with the local community, but the funding's always been federal or provincial. And is this a downloading, or is it actually an opportunity and a collaboration? There's some really interesting things here that reflect big changes in society, and to see those things endorsed. Food security as a municipal issue, all those sorts of things, the quality of life, the services being delivered that are, municipalities could play a big role in delivering health services, which right now are on a regional, provincial level. So pretty interesting document reflecting where we are right now in terms of giving mandates to the community that can really make a difference. Yeah.
Wow. Very, very thoughtful, perceptive comments. Part of my concern I did read the document from one end to the other and made individual comments, and I was, quite frankly, got lost through the following from the policy sections to the implementation to the timing, and for someone trying to do that, it was just very odd. But then I look forward to, there's been major revisions going on behind the scenes, and that's one of the things they've committed to. And I was pleased to hear in Nancy's summary, one of the key emphases going forward is improving and clarifying the implementation framework and plan. So very positive that way, but I very much support your comments and feel a little bit that I've learned in just responding to that that yes, it may be long, but there's a reason for it and a richness in that complexity and length. So, and one of the things I did population forecasts back in the 92s of the world for the city of Calgary and the 30-year projection, and they got to those 30-year population projections in 20 years. And so their 30-year plan had to be redone a lot sooner than they thought. So I really do support this idea of focusing on a level of change, like the number of households or the population level, as opposed to a date. You can either have to achieve that faster or slower than in the time frame. The time frame will be there, but I think that gives some flexibility. And the one little sidebar I would make that in this OCP, we do have a significant neighborhood being put at the corner of Ryan and Anderton, where the city doesn't own all four corners. Not own, doesn't include in its jurisdiction all four corners. So somehow controlling or managing the growth of that node is going to be difficult without thinking about expansion. That's either some very strong collaborative efforts across several jurisdictions, or it may mean some annexation. But to me, I really like the growing internally. Having that node on an edge, to me, is a bit of a flag. But overall, I'm very supportive of this. Other people, Betty. I'm sorry, I only have, so don't be afraid to use your voice to speak up, because I don't have all faces on my screen at one time.
So if there's someone else who wants to go earlier, I've already spoken, but I just wanted to say that I'm acquiring through this conversation, actually, a deeper understanding of engagement. When we began, engagement meant getting the public involved, holding these word fair, idea fairs. Now engagement seems to be the engagement with council and staff. And I'm really appreciative that we've got Bob here and that we've got Chris here, as well as Nancy, because it speaks to the internal engagement. And the anxiety I've had is that there are so many good ideas here. Will this really be used when council does its 3-year plan? If council changes, will this really be used when they do the 5-year plan, when the city staff start to plan budgets? And if I can be convinced that the engagement now is more of an internal of the trunk of the tree, then I think that we have been a very successful committee. I'm still cynical about how much can be accomplished, but anything above 50% is a real win.
Hey, Norm.
Tom?
Yeah. I got a couple comments. I want to stay away from the details and the keys. I think this is, we're through here. We've done the big chunk of the work. I think a comment for Nancy and Chris, and particularly Bob and his council, is there needs to be an understanding that while I said this is great, it's the greenest ever, I didn't say how successful I thought it was. To kind of describe what we've done is we've got this amazing green OCP that barely starts to address the damage that previous paradigms has been inflicting on our urban environment, our natural environments. And if I'm disappointed in this OCP, it's because I was hoping it was gonna go a lot further. I'm not sure we have enough time to wait another 10 years to do another one, because the next evolution, it just might not come in time, but that next evolution has to start healing the damage that we have caused. We're barely slowing the damage. We need to start turning it completely around so that the detailed policies start fixing things. They don't just make them a little bit less bad. And I think there's there's a trend in that at a lot of the high level green conferences that, that I haven't been going to for the last 3 years, but that's where we were at 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, is we need to start making things better. And so I put that out there as sort of a broad general objective for what we're looking at going forward, because we've touched on the subjects now, and I'll just kind of segue that to what Norman talked about in terms of the details. We've gone through a lot of the details. And for a variety of reasons, we've chosen to keep them small and specific. And I mean, it's partly because developers, they just want to know what to do, right? Just tell us what to do so we can get approvals and we can do our thing. But you know what? Those guys are bright. They're intelligent, some of them verging on genius. And unfortunately, by doing a detailed, quite specific OCP with lots of guidelines, lots of minutia, what did you say, thousands of objectives, we take their ability to apply their expertise and we handcuff them. I am not looking forward to working in the city of Courtenay as an architect, because in order to get approval, I'm going to have to go through and accommodate all of the little guidelines and things that are in there. Whereas I would love to have the development and growth sector say, you need to hit net zero energy, you need to stay within the envelope, and your city blocks must not exceed 200 by 200 square feet. End of story. And you know what? You get so much out of that simple, short objective. And I said, that's for 10 years from now. I think that's where we'll be. This is what we've done, and it's going to be green. But to pull it off in time, don't even get me going on affordable housing, because over the weekend up at Whistler with some old friends of mine, we pretty much had some of the most depressing conversations possible, because none of our kids will ever be able to afford to purchase housing. So, and I don't think this OCP has done anything to help that. We might have slowed the terribleness that we're creating in terms of housing affordability, but it hasn't solved it. It hasn't turned the corner. It's just me too, right? This is just us, my thoughts on it. I said, I'm totally in support of what we've done. I wished it could have gone further. I have all kinds of ideas for simplifying it so that the genius of our development community and our investors can solve it for us without having to have TATs tell me that I need to set back the top story. Like, I just don't want to do any of that. And I say crap just because I'm in that mood, but the stuff that's in our guidelines is crap. It doesn't do anything for the big picture. So again, I'm not looking forward to it. I'm going to be coming back to the council with variance after variance after variance to the OCP guidelines, because they're minutia, and they're really not important in the big picture that hopefully we get to before it's too late. I'll leave it at that. Like I said, I totally support of what we've done. Norm, you don't have to worry about me. I will be supporting your report to council. We have done it, right? It's there. How it works itself out, we'll get to find out soon enough. But we won't be able to rest, that's for sure. So
We will.
thank you.
Tanis or Annalise?
Yeah, I can say something. Yeah, I think I agree with what Tom is saying about the affordable housing thing. I think what we have as a document is really great. Definitely way better than the old one, including like topics of climate change, affordability, quality. Definitely big steps there, but obviously I think there's always room for improvement. There's always room to go further, be more progressive. The housing thing scares me as a young adult, especially if I wanted to move back to the valley and live there as a young person. It would be pretty unaffordable. Yeah, I think I'm definitely very supportive of the document and supporting it as a member of the committee. But yeah, it just reminded me of my fear up here, Tom.
Fair enough. Looking across, yes, Chris. And I'm just happen to be scrolling back and forth across faces. So do verbalize when you want to speak, even if, and we'll sort out if there's multiple voices at a time. But Chris, you're next.
Yeah, just to address some of Tom's comments and having been let go from 2 jobs in Ontario for having gone too far with environmental progressiveness. I'm conscious as a staff person that you have to have, you know, the majority of your community in mind when you're doing your planning. And as much as I and all of us would love to be more progressive and you know, be more inventive and sustainable in the work that we're doing, we do have to bring along a lot of people who aren't at our level of understanding. And so that's where the education comes in. You know, there is a price to pay for being too far ahead of the rest of the gang. And, you know, I'm just really happy to be working for a community that has as progressive a plan as it has, that really matches a lot of, you know, what I think is important in terms of future growth of a community. And I think is very progressive for an official community plan. I've seen a lot of community plans that don't go anywhere near what's being proposed here. So full kudos to you guys for having you know, been part of this process and bringing it to this point. But I do think we have to remember that not everybody is as informed and understanding of the issues as we are. And so we have to, you know, compromise somewhat our desire to go further.
Tom. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That's great. You reminded me your opening comments about other jurisdictions in other parts of the country. I just received a memo from, I can't who it came through, but it was from the province stating that they have just signed on, the province of BC has just signed on to the unification of the building codes across the country. And I don't know if anyone else has seen that, but when Nancy showed her slide earlier at the aggressive step code targets, I kind of smiled and thought, oh yeah, well, get ready to delete those, because I'm pretty sure that the whole intent of this new policy that the province has just signed on to, it will be to eliminate the step code. And BC is way ahead of every other province in terms of energy efficiency in their building code. Why, oh why, oh why would any color of provincial government sign on to a plan to make our building code the same as Alberta's or Ontario's? I mean, we are going to go so far backwards so quickly so that the BC building code is exactly the same as the Alberta code, is exactly the same as the Saskatchewan code. I just don't, I quite frankly, I don't get it. And I feel quite depressed that, you know, again, there's a big change in direction in the wrong way. And I kind of feel that we're going to end up facing that in the not too distant future. And it is frustrating because we really need to be taking big steps, big steps in the other direction. And my plan, Chris, to respond to you, Chris, is that I think we can create a world where our developers don't even realizing they're being progressive. I mean, I can see Crown Isle saying, what? That's all we have to do? What, there's like the OCP is like 3 lines and that's it. No more of Tats's, setbacks and this and that. We just have to do subdivision layouts like this. Whoa. Now they're actually doing it optimistically, positively, progressively. That's just one of my ideas, but they will make the world a better place for walkability, social issues, all of those things by doing 1 or 2 simple things. But I've heard, and this is the problem, I've heard that because of codes and municipal acts, we're actually not allowed to do those things. So we're stuck doing it the way we can do it. And until that changes, like I said, we've got a great OCP here that hopefully will do its job. But anyways, I could go on forever on that one. But yeah, I can't wait to see what happens with the code.
Well, one of the problems we always have is when we standardize is to the least common denominator, so that the last one in the queue doesn't have to change too much. And so that would be a real concern. And I also emphasize strongly with this idea of putting more of the decision-making responsibility onto the initiator, rather than simply allowing them to say, I do this because I have to follow the minutia. If you take the decision-making power out of their control, they're quite happy to pass on responsibility and not think. And the good developers and whatnot would prefer the flexibility to innovate if the broad parameters were there, rather than just absent. So I think are there any other comments people want to step forward through? One of the
Norm,
I was just going to jump in real quick. Just talking about challenges and one of the things, if I were to point a finger, I'd probably point it at COVID. But this process, as you started the meeting with, took significantly longer than was anticipated, which means that this is going to come before council, and the implementation will be started at best right before an election, and that's challenging if there's a group of people that find things within this document unacceptable. Even though what I'm hearing at this meeting is that by and large we're moving in the right direction, and so that can make changes. So to me, it's not just it's obviously there's going to be a report that comes to council, but really supporting this OCP as best you can, regardless of what happens up to and after the election. Because I can tell you that that's one of the things that does concern me is just it feels like we're going in the right direction, but it could technically be undone to a degree. So that's the part that is frustrating to a little bit. But having said that, I'd much rather have what we have, and huge congratulations to staff and everybody who stepped up to make sure we got to where we are. But that's one thing that I'll be working on as best I can, is to make sure that the messaging is as positive and optimistic going forward. So
Good.
Thanks for that.
Okay, there was someone else that was going to just speak up there. Good points, Bob. Okay, so a couple of things, the OCP, I was challenged on the street one day for the OCP being a failure because it didn't set new economic development targets and plans and strategies and goals. And my response to that person was, the place where you look at the detailed nuances, be it climate change, affordable housing, transportation plans is in the specific reports in those areas. And from that, you build the big picture. And so I think and you really can't just start applying economic development goals and strategies without any context or looking at their implications. So I think that this overall plan has done a very good job of picking up the spirit and direction that the city has, through staff and council, have set over the last several years on many dimensions. And as Sheila said, recognizing the complexities, the interrelationships, the strengths, and Tanis, you made that point as well, of how this ties together and makes a meaningful plan going forward. So I think we can all be very supportive of it. I also want to take extra time to acknowledge the leadership that Nancy has shown through this whole process, with all the changes, with all respect to Tats and Chris and Ian and all the others that have played in this process. The one constant has been Nancy. And I understand that Nancy's been doing a lot of the editing. And I don't, and therefore the negotiating with all the different staff departments to make sure that their recognition of priorities and commitments are in there. And I know that she would have a lot of support in those staff department discussions. But my compliments to Nancy for, in the midst of all of that, leading and facilitating this group through its contribution. And I think that's been extraordinary. So thank you, Nancy. And everyone has their mute on. But I think we all appreciate that. And finally, for us to wrap up, we need to have a report into council by May 16th, the latest, if it's to go with the agenda on May 30th, which means that if backing up, I need comments from you people within about 4 days from now, before the end of the month, so that I can take 3 or 4 days to do any final edits or do edits, get you a draft, and let you have one final look at it. So it's really important that members of the committee get their thoughts and phrases and any concerns outstanding that they want reflected in the draft that we have to me within 4 days. And I'll confirm that in writing so that I can commit to getting it back out to you for one final look before we send it into the city.
Are you looking for about 10,000 or 20,000 words, Norm? Is that what you're? Yeah.
I was originally instructed by the committee to write a short report. We're at about 5.5 pages now. I wouldn't want to add more than 1.5 pages. But if necessary, if there's an appendix that needs to go with that, that's absolutely fine. But really, as you've emphasized, Tom, let's keep a focus on the big picture. And I take your humor. I recognize that, but I'm not going to miss the chance to emphasize. But get your comments to me within 4 days. And then I will commit to getting back to you, because then we can wrap up and conclude what I think has been a very good process. Sheila.
Yeah, I wonder if you could send the draft that you've done out again. I'm spending lots of time looking through past emails trying to find the document attachments, and it would be helpful if whatever.
I will send it again. Yes.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Okay. And Annalise.
Yeah. Just curious, how, like, length of comment from us as individuals, like not that long, because I'm really hoping it's not that long.
It's not that long,
because I don't think I can write 20,000 words on top of all my exams.
No, it really isn't that long.
Please don't suggest that.
You know, when Betty and I talked about the note that should go out, and we said, what are your 2 major positives and your 2 major concerns? And to some extent, we've covered them. We've had an opportunity to verbalize them today, But if there's some phrasing, I know that some of you used some very excellent phrases, and I tried to write them down as quickly as I could. But there may be some phrasing that you think is really important. But
Okay.
years ago, students of mine said, you know, Norman, you said to write only so many words in a report. You know, how many words is that? Or, you know, I think I said 6 pages, and they said, does it matter the size of the font you use? Or what's the penalty if you go over? And I said, if one of you goes over, it doesn't matter, but I have 150 students. If all of you put 10 extra pages in, I'm here for weeks afterward, and my humor's going down. And nobody exceeded it. So again, if you have something important to say, I'll be happy to read it, but just try and focus on the points that we're trying to make to council at this stage in the process. If you've got detailed comments, they should have been into Nancy well before now. Does that answer sufficiently? Okay. Thank you, everyone on this committee. It's been 29 months of extended work, lots of meetings, lots of reading, lots of outreach to your communities and encouraging people to take part, incredible amounts of thought and input. And Betty and I would like to thank you. It's been a joy to sort of facilitate this process. So with that, I will close the meeting and look forward to getting your comments.
As Norm closes the meeting, I want to say that in addition to Nancy, the consistency of Norm's leadership, through which he had some health problems plus COVID, I believe both of those kinds of leadership for me have been inspiring. So we've had Bob in the mayor's seat, Nancy as staff, and I mean, Tat supported her, and everybody actually did, but they were movable chairs. And Norm, who kept on in spite of climbing uphill on the health mountain. That is a consistency that I think the rest of us should just applaud. So unmute and applaud.
Thank you. Nancy, do you have any concluding comments?
We appreciate the accolades all around. I can speak for staff as well. We've really enjoyed working on this project and hear the passion from the wide, from the community, particularly yourselves that have followed us every step of the way through all the growth pains. But it's a rewarding process, as I think any kind of growth generally is. I'd like to say on housekeeping matters, we're going to need a motion to adjourn. That's all. The other item I want to say is council really asked us, staff think it's a good idea, but council asked specifically that we evaluate this advisory committee process so that we can learn how to to improve, always in the spirit. This is not, the city does not have a culture of committees. So in many ways, some of us were cutting our teeth on it. So that kind of feedback, in the trenches kind of feedback is really helpful. So maybe we will convene a meeting that will extend beyond the terms of this committee, or maybe we'll find a way that you can submit comments in a different way. But I just want to let you know you'll be hearing from me in the future on how to make community engagement processes rewarding, effective, efficient, all whatever qualities we think are important. So yeah, it's not over yet, I guess. And Norm, maybe if you just want to solicit that motion to adjourn.
Yes, and first, I think when the tone of what we've heard today from the committee members is really a strong wish for council, Chris, Nancy, all of you to be, and all your staff people to be able to conclude this process well. I think you've done well to get this far, and hopefully it goes well from here. So motion to adjourn. Tom, seconder. Sheila, all those in favor? Thank you. And with that,
thanks everybody.
Thank you.
I'm going to quote Captain Picard and say, make it so.
Thank you.
Great. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.